Part of it is endurance, part of it is motivation, part of it is incentives and rewards and fun stuff, part of it is good old-fashioned discipline. You throw all of that into the stew. We talk a lot here about grit and self-control. The kids know what those words mean. Levin walked down the hall to an 8th grade math class and stood quietly in the back. A student named Aaron was at the front of the class, working his way through a problem from the page right there, so I signed it. With that, her life changed. Keep in mind, while listening to what follows, that Marita is 12 years old. I wake up at 5:45 a.m. to get a head start, she says. I brush my teeth, shower. I get some breakfast at school if I'm running late. Usually get yelled at because I'm taking too long. I meet my friends Diana and Stephen at the bus stop, and we get the number 1 bus. A 5 friends and summer vacations to push their children ahead. Her community does not give her what she needs. And what does she have to do? To give up her evenings and weekends and friends, all the elements of her old world, for Kip. Here is Marita again in a passage that is little short of heartbreaking. When we first started 5th grade, I used to have contact with one of the girls from my old school. And whenever I left school on the real lessons of success, we squandered talent. If Canada had a second hockey league for those children born in the last half of the year, it would have twice as many adult hockey stars. Now, multiply that lost potential through every field and profession. The world we could have is so much richer than the world we have settled for. Marita doesn't need a brand new school with acres of playing fields and a story of my mother's path to success. And it isn't true. It's not a lie in the sense that the facts are made up, but it is false in the way that telling the story of Bill Gates without mentioning the computer at Lakeside is false, or accounting for Asian math prowess without going back to the rice paddies is false. It leaves energy to make them real. My grandmother did. St. Hilda's was her idea. Some of the wealthier families in the area sent their daughters there, and she saw what a good school meant. Her daughters did not play with the other children of the village. They read. Latin and algebra were necessary for high school, so she had her daughters tutored by Archdeacon Hay. If you'd asked her about her goals for her children, she would have said she wanted us out of there. My mother was, who gave up her scholarship, and then to Mr. Chance, and most of all, to Daisy Nation. Daisy Nation was from the northwestern end of Jamaica. Her great-grandfather was William Ford. He was from Ireland, and he arrived in Jamaica in 1784, having bought a coffee plantation. Not long after his arrival, he bought a slave woman and took her as his concubine. He noticed her on the docks at just Orlando Patterson says. By 1826, they had full civil liberties. In fact, they achieved full civil liberties at the same time as the Jews do in Jamaica. They could vote, do anything a white person can do, and this is within the context of what was still a slave society. Ideally, they would try to be artisans. Remember, Jamaica has sugar plantations, which are... Her grandfather John, the son of William Ford and his African concubine, ended up as a preacher. No less than 3 members of the extended Ford family ended up winning Rhodes scholarships. If my mother owed William M. Macmillan and the rioters of 1937 and Mr. Chance and her mother Daisy Ford, then Daisy owed Rufus and Carlos and Anne and Charles and John. My grandmother was a remarkable woman, also well up the colored totem pole. She was white and light. But she was a widow, and her husband had been what in Jamaica is called an Injun, a man with a dark complexion and straight, fine black hair, and their daughters were dark like their father. One day, after her husband had died, she was traveling on a train to visit her daughter, and she met and took an interest in a light-skinned man in the same railway car. What happened next is something that Aunt Joan told only my mother on his life and say, I was very lucky. And he was. The Mothers Club of Lakeside Academy bought him a computer in 1968. It is impossible for a hockey player or Bill Joy or Robert Oppenheimer or any other outlier for that matter to look down from their lofty perch and say with truthfulness, I did this all by myself. Superstar lawyers and math whizzes and software entrepreneurs appear at first blush, help society design programs or policies or have ideas about how to bring the level of performance higher. So that was the notion that there is something very useful to be learned from people whose lives and experiences fall outside the norm.
That's where you started, but where did you end up?
There is an ironic element to calling the book Outliers, because in the end, what I conclude and what I end, however old he was, he's way ahead of everyone else in that space. You know, he has this incredible head start. You know, he really is. The rest of the world, the computer science world, was running a mile, and Bill Gates was running a half mile. And that's the reason why he is where he is today. I mean, there are other factors, obviously, that are part of that, but he had this incredibly formative experience. That had nothing to do with him. It had to do with him being in the right places and environments. And it means I think you have to take culture very seriously. And you have to ask yourself, what is it that we inherit from our forebears and from our culture that makes a difference in our lives? And I, for example, have a long chapter about why it is that Asians do so well in math. Right? Every year, every 4 years, there's an international math test given to 7th and...
Conclude with a piece that's close to home. It's about your mother as an outlier.
Yeah, because this book was so personal, I thought it would be appropriate to end on a personal note. And so the last chapter is all about my mother is Jamaican and grew up in a house the size of the recording studio I'm in right now, whose parents, although they were school teachers, by any contemporary reckoning, were lower middle class. His friends happened to be people who were outliers. I mean, absolutely. Particularly the one at Harvard who's a one in a million kind of guy. I would not be here without those two. Absolutely not. I mean, they shaped me in ways that I can barely even begin to understand. And that was just luck. I mean, pure and simple. And it's very humbling to think of the fact that your life was in the hand of this much larger group, and you were allowed to make fun of them because you're not threatening, right? You permit minorities to make light of you because there's no way they can, first of all, they're not powerful enough to threaten you in some way, but secondly, because they're not part of your world, they can be rude, right? The person who you grew up with in your family or who is a close part of your culture, you hold them to a very high standard of behavior,